And good evening tonight, and thank you. This is Dr. Kathy James, fondly known as Mama James, and I want to welcome you to the King's Table. Why the King's Table? It's a platform that you can come and talk about various issues, your personal life issues, our biblical issues, our community issues, whatever we're facing today in various different challenges. But what we do want to do is remember that this is a biblically based platform. And we feel some responsibility and accountability to bring various topics to the table. Tonight, none other is another great topic. And remember this one thing, we all have a responsibility and an obligation. And of course, I'm going to the book of Esther. Esther again was presented with some major challenges in her life. And there came a point in time where she too had to look at the issues that were facing her life. Today, we are facing some issues around voting. Yep, that's right. We're going to talk about voting tonight. And we have a responsibility to vote. Voting is your superpower. And that's right. You need to go vote. And when you do, vote intelligently, where you studied, and you've made yourself aware of what there is around the voting. So tonight I'm going to call the panel to the table and ask them to come and join me, and let's just find out what's going on. Hey, Kimmy. Hey, Crystal.
Hello.
Hello.
Boy, I tell you, this weather is so interesting. Yesterday it was so hot. It was unbelievable. I was blessed to be able to speak for the morning worship service, and they put the platform right in the sun. And I had on this dress that just soaked up the heat. And when I finished, I was dripping in sweat. But the Lord blessed. And it was just amazing to see the people on yesterday. So, Kimmy, what was your day like yesterday?
So yesterday, my day was just full of activities for church. Went to church and did praise and worship. And we got a new bunny in our home. So we have a new little pet. Like, I needed another one. They named it Wisteria is her or his name. We won't know the sex until a couple weeks. So we're busy just getting a rabbit for the little one. So that was it.
Yeah. I thought it was funny today. I had the kids in class and they were talking about the new bunny and is it a boy or a girl? And they said, we don't know if it's a boy or a girl. And how come they have to be born a boy or a girl? What is it? And I'm like, I can't even explain this one. Let's go to the next subject. So, Bunny, so Crystal, tell me, how was your weekend?
Oh, my weekend was great. The weather was beautiful here. So we jumped on our bikes and did a couple hours. So it was nice. We got in quite a few miles and we just enjoyed. We went on a nice day downtown Sacramento. So just walked the streets, farmers market. So it was real relaxing for me because it was a crazy busy week at work.
So, Crystal, two things. One, you got to be very clear when you talk about you jumped on your bikes. I have a road bike and I pedal my bike 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 miles. What kind of bike are you talking about?
Yeah, I'm a biker chick. What can I say? His name is Sir Knight. I jumped on my white horse. Me and the Honda Shadow, we jumped on and we went riding. It's a vroom vroom, not a pedal bike.
I love it. It'll be a lot of fun. Yeah. And the second thing for you, Crystal, you haven't shared the good news. And if you don't mind me, throwing you out there, I just really want to give a shout out to Crystal Cyprian. For those of you that don't know, Crystal is a medical professional. For a long time, she has worked for Mercy General for over Dignity Health for over 25 years. And the Lord blessed and opened a door through her diligent study and work ethics and commitment. She is now the director of a cardiac unit for Sutter Medical Foundation. Is that correct, Crystal?
That is correct. Praise God. I'm very excited. It's a new journey for sure. And I'm ready for the challenge. Although I have to say, I feel like I'm walking in stilettos up Mount Everest, but that's okay.
Well, I believe in this in God's word. God won't call you to anything that he has not prepared or opened a way for you. So we're just so excited for you and we praise God. And I know you're going to do great things. I know you're going to change everything around there. I see Sister Shayla McKnight just put on her hand clap. She's a Sutter baby. You've joined a community of Sutterites, and we say congratulations, and we know that God is going to do great things through you.
Thank you.
So God bless you. So tonight at the table, ladies, we're going to be talking about voting and our responsibility to vote. And for people who don't vote, it saddens my heart to know that you've given yourself an excuse, a reason, or you've justified why you're not going to be bothered with voting. And we want to talk about that tonight. So we have a couple of guests. We have one who won't join us until about 7:30. And that's Dr. Matthews Harris. She's going to come on and she'll be sharing with us some information around Proposition 16. And then we have a young woman from my church, from the Progressive Church. Her name is Ronisha Hall. She's going to go ahead and join us at the table tonight. And she's going to be sharing with us on Proposition 23. Let's go ahead and meet her at this time. Miss Ronisha.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you all?
Wonderful. So
Good.
thank you for joining us at the King's Table.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. You look absolutely beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
This is your first time at the table, and I think this is
Yes.
your first time being exposed to it. So what we do at the King's Table, to our audience, for all of those of you that are watching, thank you very much. What we're going to talk about are the various issues that we are faced with today. And some of those issues in our lives are only going to get better through the political system and the opportunity to vote. So we can change things by a vote, but if you choose not to vote, you're missing some wonderful opportunities. And really, by not voting, you silence your voice. You don't have a right to complain. You don't have a right to, wave the flag and say what other people are doing to you unless you go out and vote. So what are your thoughts around voting, Ronisha?
I agree with everything you said so far regarding voting. You don't have a right to complain if you don't exercise your vote. I was class of 2000, so my first election, and our opinion was taken from us voting. So a lot of people in that generation didn't want to vote, but the more your parents encourage you and the more you realize how important it is as you grow up and get into the workforce and just life in general comes and different things come up, you understand that it is important to exercise your vote and your voice does matter. And, there's a lot of crooks in politics, but at the end of the day, we all know God is going to take care of us. But while we're here on this earth, we do have duties to do that. And that's one of them. And it's very important, especially when it comes to all the propositions and things like that.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. You said something I want to piggyback on, and then I'll allow the other two to have some comments. And that is, it's important that we teach our children. You said parents, you need to be talking about the voting system, how it works, how people are elected, and how, the different numbers are spread out amongst the different states and how those final decisions are made. And the propositions, how important they are and how they impact us at the local level. So Crystal and Kimmy, one of you go ahead and share your thoughts around voting. Kimmy?
Yeah, so for me, I feel the same, is that you need to vote. You need to have a voice. And if you don't vote, then you do not have a position to be able to complain. And you don't have a ground to stand on if you don't get out there and vote. And when people say, oh, well, my vote doesn't count. No, it really does count. It really makes a difference, specifically with your propositions for your direct counties and your cities and states that you're in. It does have an effect. And it does have an effect presidential wise, because every single vote counts. Sometimes presidents lose by just a series of 3 votes per precinct. So you could see like how much of an influence you could have when it comes to voting. So I think it's very important, and that's the way you're going to get your voice out there.
Great. Thank you. Crystal, what are your thoughts around voting?
Yeah, I think that we have to definitely look back on history. That's a reason why we study history. In the past, me, for example, I am a Black woman. I've had 2 strikes against me that has silenced my voice. One, being Black. There were times when Black people just could not vote. And then they allowed Black males to vote. But then a woman your voice was still silent and you couldn't vote. So when I don't vote, it's like I now have silenced my own voice after someone has championed for me years and years prior. So I don't owe it to myself to vote. I owe it to all of those who fought that fight so that I could have that right to vote. And I know that I remember Schoolhouse Rock, how a law becomes a bill, right? We were young listening to that. And then Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader, right? They start learning about all of the different, legislations, constitution. We have to just really piggyback on that and strengthen our own knowledge and resolve and make sure we are informed so that we can affect the future.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I think it's really sad when we sit back and say, well, they're not going to listen to us anyway, and I'm not going to waste my time. But this is a year that we all better get in line, get to the ballot box, get somewhere and turn in a vote. So we want to just talk tonight about a few of the propositions. We're not here to persuade anybody in which way you should vote. What we do want to do is just remind you that you have an obligation and a responsibility to vote. And this is a time, like Esther, all the challenges that she had. And I've alluded to this several times in the book of Esther. We keep forgetting that Esther went to the king more than one time because an edict had already been made. And according to the laws of the system and the laws of the land, the king had already signed the bill. And the bill was that all the Jews were going to die and that she was the queen. Because she stood up and gave her vote through her voice and her risk of her life, a change was made. But she had to go back to the king again because there were other things that were put in place that only the king could change. So that's what we're doing today. We are challenging the system with our voice, with our vote, to say that a change must be made. So let's look at a couple of propositions. And I'm going to start with Proposition 14. And the proposition that I want to look at starting out is authorizes bond continuing stem cell research initiative statute. And again, we're not here to tell you whether you should vote yes or no. But let's just have a roundtable discussion on this one. When we talk about if you vote yes, this is what it means. A yes vote on this measure means the state could sell 5.5 million in general obligation bonds, primarily for stem cell research and the development of new medical treatment in California. That's a yes. If you vote no, this means the state could not sell 5.5 million in general obligation bonds, primarily for STEM research and the development of new medical treatment in California. Again, we ask you to go and read that in its entirety. But just for conversation purposes, for me, stem cell research means so many things. There are so many advantages to it that I see that are beneficial. Any other thoughts around the table?
Well, when we think about stem cell, and I just always have to put the propositions into context for me. I think the HeLa cell opened up a whole lot of knowledge for us when we start thinking about Henrietta Lacks and how they took one of her cells, and even today, because of her cells, we're able to fight certain cancers. Right? And we were able to have certain breakthroughs in technology because of that testing. So of course, your first mind is like, say, yes, there's so much that you can do. And then you have the other side of it, right? Because you got to look at both sides. Some people are like, no, I don't want somebody using cells that come from a human and using them later. And even if it is fighting Alzheimer's or even if it is fighting dementia, I don't want to harvest stem cells. So those are the people that will probably say no. And then those are those that will say yes, because they have had families maybe affected by Alzheimer's and they're looking for a cure. And the only way we're going to find that cure is using stem cells.
And that is true. So again, this is Kimmy. Do you have a comment?
Nope.
Ronisha.
Yes, just a brief one. I saw a documentary on 60 Minutes regarding stem cells with regarding sickle cells as well. And I was kind of I was always a quick no against it until I saw that, and I know a young lady, a very young teenage young lady, but I know for a fact what Crystal, piggybacking on what she just said, they're not gonna do that. That family wouldn't do that because it's human, cells. They're not educated on details of it, and they don't want to, any other human cells.
Right.
But
Again,
I
we
think
need,
it would be so helpful for that 14-year-old that's dealing with sickle cells. It would be UC Davis has a lot of minuses and they have pluses, but they're one of the ones that did kind of do that documentary, and the young lady, no more sickle cell for her, and they're trying it out,
now what
So
documentary is that?
it was on 60 Minutes. I saw it last weekend,
Okay.
and they were just talking about hemogenealogy and regarding the using of stem cells.
Great.
And she did a chemotherapy because they found some cancer cells, but then they found a sickle in there as well. And so, yeah, it cleared out everything. And she was completely all the way better. And she still is, like 3 years later. They're still
Good.
following her and tracing her.
So what we want to do is really make sure that we're reading the propositions in their totality, the pros and the cons, and then vote based on your own personal convictions. So to the table tonight, what's your overall vote?
I'm going yes.
Yes, for me
Yes.
too.
Yes. All righty.
I
All
had a
righty.
part- Yes.
That's okay. So let's jump into Proposition 15, and that's mine as well. Proposition 15 says it increases funding sources for public schools, community colleges, and local government services by changing tax assessment of commercial and industrial property initiative constitutional amendment. So the yes, if you vote yes on 15, this measure means that property tax on most commercial properties worth more than $3 million would go up in order to provide new funding to local government and schools. If you vote no, the no means on this measure, property tax on commercial properties would stay the same. Local governments and schools would not get new funding. So I want to be the first person to say, after teaching a couple of grandbabies for a few months, I'm saying teachers and schools need some money. Teachers need to make more money, however they get it. I'm just being funny and crazy here because I'm a little, babysitting, teaching these kids. We have not appreciated those teachers, I think, at the level that they need to be appreciated. And if this is a way to do it, we just encourage you to read the ballot in its totality. I did get a call today from an activist group saying, hey, can we get your yes vote on this? It's really important to our schools that they get more money for funding to buy the resources and increase teacher salaries so that we can provide a better service to our children. If you vote no, it's a clean cut. Either it will happen or it won't happen. And the taxes will only be to the larger businesses. It is not to the local taxpayer, and it is not to the residents for this bill. Any comments from those of you on the panel?
Yeah, the only comment I'll make on that is because it's going after commercial buildings and not just residential homeowners, that money is really going to help more coming from more of the wealthy. And we know that teachers need it. I have teachers in my family. My mother-in-law is a teacher, and they dig in their pockets just to buy paper and pens and pencils for their students in school. And they shouldn't have to do that. They should be able to provide an environment where the school can provide the things that they need. Instead, she's using her money just to make sure that her classroom has everything that it needs.
That's true. And Kimmy, you're the parent of 3 young school kids. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think the initiative is good. I think that money does need to come from somewhere. The 3 million, that has a commercial property that's more than 3 million, I just get a little bit more like, is it what they're profiting is 3 million? Is the actual building worth 3 million? There are some questions there, and are we pulling from any other resource, and why is it just the commercial building, or is it a commercial business?
It says commercial property owners. So again, that's why it's important that we educate our own selves and we become aware of what does the proposition say in detail. Is it difficult and challenging to read? Yes, but it's really important that you do. And I think, Crystal, you had your ballot out a few moments ago,
Mhm.
and that ballot is thick. They give you so much, but you need to go through and outline it and read it so you know what you're voting for. And a lot of people just don't take the time to do that. And right now, with all of the government buildings and companies not going back to the actual office buildings, you're kind of wondering what this is going to look like moving forward. But today, we know that our schools need more help.
Yep.
And it also said, I don't want to miss this, it was in there too. It said for government services. What does that mean when we look at it says funding to local governments and school? What governments? What will they get from that? And what will you and I get? What will the people get out of that? So make sure you read it and that you become well versed in it. Any other comments? I have number 16. We're just going to read it, but we are going to come back to it. It's one that we think is really important, and we really want to have a nice discussion around this one. Allows diversity as a factor in public employment, education, and contracting decisions. Legislative constitutional amendment. This is something that's in place today, and the voting on this particular proposition would create an amendment. We have an expert who is an advocate for this. She's going to join us at 7:30, so we're going to table this one and come back. So now we're going to move into the hands of Crystal Cyprian.
Okay, so I have Prop 17. So I'm just going to sum that up. Prop 17 is saying restore the right to vote after the completion of your prison term. So currently right now, you're not able to vote until after you finish your parole. So if you say no on that, it will stay the same. Prisoners, after they serve their term, they will not be able to vote while they're on parole. They have to complete the parole. But if we say yes on this proposition, it would affect over 40,000 people. And while they're still on parole, they will have the privilege to vote. They're working, they're paying taxes, and while they're on parole, they can vote if you say yes.
Well, I know that's definitely one that's going to be a controversial issue because people believe that you need to first pay your debt in full before you're able to resume the benefits of quote unquote your citizenship. So again, what we're asking you to do is read it, become intelligent on it, and if not, the consequences of that is waiting till it comes back to the ballot in another 4 years. So at the table, do we have a consensus of what we are thinking?
I'm going to go with a yes on this particular one. And the reason why I say that is because if we're trying to reintroduce people back to society, they're working, they're doing well on their parole. I think we should support that.
Yes,
Yeah.
I agree.
I agree.
After I read a little bit more into it, I'll probably have a little bit more better position on it. Coming from Department of Corrections and working as a peace officer, there's a lot of background and a lot of information that I kind of want to pull back up. And then look at really what are some of the barriers when I did talk to inmates about their right to vote, and the people that I know now that still can't vote and have really paid back to society, have their own businesses, they're paying taxes, and they're like, I can see a change, I want to make a change, but they can't because they can't vote. So
Right.
see both sides.
That's good. That's a good thought, Kimmy. I have a young man friend that I met just a few months ago, actually last year. And his name is Joaquin. I really wish I would have invited him on tonight. And I hope he's watching because he served 25 years in prison and he got out on everything was exonerated for him. He did wonderful. He got educated. He just made bad decisions when he was young and he got out. And when he got out, he came out fully employed by major corporations. He's made amazing changes, educated himself, but he still could not vote until he finished that parole. And I saw him on Facebook the other day and he's holding up that ballot, said, this is the first time in my life that I've been able to vote. and he was just thrilled to death. But he should have been able to vote much sooner because he had done everything that he needed to do to pay back that debt to society. So, but again, we need to be educated in our voting choices. Crystal.
Prop 18. So on Prop 18, I'll just give you a summary of that one. So Prop 18 is pretty much allowing first-time voters to participate in a full election if they turn 18 by the general election. 18 other states already currently have this in place. So if you vote yes, you're saying, I want them to have early engagement. They may be 17 years old, but by the time the primary election comes, they'll be 18. And this will be a good way to get them a part of the process. If you say no, those that say no, they're still underage. They're not legal until they're 18, and they are under the influence of their parents. So they should not have a voice until they are 18 years old. It's a very black and white rule if you say no on Prop 18.
Wow. Interesting. And we have a lot of young ladies listening to us tonight. We'd like to have you comment on what are your thoughts around allowing those to vote who won't turn 18 until the actual general election. And Crystal, can you say that again so I make sure I said that right?
Yeah, it allows first-time voters to participate in a full election if they turn 18 by the general election. So it's kind of like that school, right? I'm going to be 4, and if I'm 5 by a certain month, then I can go into kindergarten. It's the same thing about this voting. If they're 17 by February or March, and, you know, with the voting being in November, if they're 18, then they can vote.
Okay, yeah, because as I was reading it, it was saying if they turn 18 by the next general election. So this general election is in November. The next general election, if I'm 17 on September and I'm going to turn 18 in December, I should be able to vote.
You should be able to participate and start. And people that say yes on this believe in early engagement at a 17-year-old is going to set them up for success, that they'll always be a part of the process. But people say, does a 17-year-old know their own mind, or are they under the influence still yet of their family because they're not adults?
Yeah. And here we're talking about just a couple of months. We're not talking about, you know, they're going to be 18 at the end of the, now this right here says if they turn 18 by the next general election. And I guess for me, clarity is, when is the next general election?
Well, you know, they would be within that 12-month window.
Yeah.
So that's the one thing that's important to remember, because we're not talking about a 16-year-old that's 16.9 months. Right. We're talking about you're at least 17.1 day within that year. And I don't know, for me, I feel like that, you know, they should be able to vote. I'm looking at some of the comments over on this feed right here, and it says, allow them to vote, because some adults don't even know their minds yet.
Right, exactly. Right. I was just reading that too. Some adults, you know, these 17-year-olds that are getting close to 18, they want to vote.
They do.
They can't vote. And you're right. Some adults who have the right to vote and everything, they're not going to. So if we can bring people in and we can ensure that they've had the proper education and the understanding around voting, I think they should be able to vote. So for me, it would be a clear yes.
For me, I'm yes on that as well.
Yes.
Renisha?
I agree.
Okay,
totally
you're
agree.
a young woman. I don't know what month your birthday was in, but would that have impacted you?
Yes, actually, I fell into that January school birth thing.
Okay.
Yeah. So I fell right dead into that, having to start right after. Yeah, totally got it.
Yes, great. Looks like
Good.
Dr. Harris is joining us at this time. Good evening. How are you?
Good evening. How are you?
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us, and to everyone to the panel. This is Dr. Colette Harris Matthews. She is a dean at the Cosumnes River College, and tonight she is going to share with us on one of the propositions and have some great dialogue with us. But before she does, we are going to go back to one of the propositions that we were just talking about, and I think you can bring some good conversation to this. Colette, may I call you Colette tonight?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Great, thank you. We're talking about Proposition 18. Hey, Crystal, what was it? Here we go.
It allows first-time voters to participate in a full election if they turn 18 by the general election.
Mhm.
We're having great discussion about this is a way to engage voters early when they're 17 to start participating in the process. But those that want to vote no says when they're 17, they're not 18 yet, and they're not adults, and they don't know their own mind, and they're under the influence of their parents.
As someone who's an educator at community college, we have students as young as, in some cases 14, 15, they do dual enrollment. And I think a one size fits all about maturity is, an understatement. 17-year-olds often have, 1 year does not make the great difference. We really need to consider that many of our youth are far more mature and have an understanding of civics. I mean, at that point, as a junior, they've gone through government, they've gone through, social studies, they have a good understanding of American history and, who's eligible to vote. I think some of us need to go back to those, some of us need to go back to those basic lessons. But I think a 17-year-old is mature enough, especially since at 18, people register, they register for the draft. And they also are able to then, enter into the military. They're starting to make decisions about where they're going to go to college and what they're going to do with the rest of their lives. Most people, if they live where they live, they've had a lot of background and, life. A lot of our 17-year-olds have seen a lot of life, especially now. They've seen a lot of things in terms of, shootings in their schools. They've seen what's happening in terms of, presidency. They've seen what's happening in terms of social justice. There's a lot that 17-year-olds have seen. So I think it's a good amendment. I think that, the people who are saying no, maybe taking it one person, that they're thinking of that one person that lacks a maturity. But I think when we think overall of where our 17-year-olds are across the nation and what we expect of them in a short amount of time, that they will go off to do adult things, whether it's making a decision about college or going to the military or going the Peace Corps. I'm a believer in at 17, you need to have a plan, for what happens next.
Right in there. Great
what happens next?
And you brought some really great thoughts to that conversation about all the things that they're currently exposed to and how well some of them are managing that, and those who are going to school. I have a couple of nieces and nephews who've graduated from high school and junior college at the same time, and they're 16 and 17 years old. So of course they would definitely be ready to make those voting decisions. So thank you for that. Addition to that conversation. Crystal, you want to go ahead and go to number 19?
I will jump right into 19. So 19 is changing certain property tax rules. And so this one was, I had to really kind of dig deep into this one. And just like everybody else out there, there are so many, you can Google propositions. They have them on YouTube. People are discussing them in great lengths, talking about the pros and the cons. So this one, in a summary, homeowners who are over 55, if they're disabled, they meet certain qualifications, or if they've experienced certain disasters like wildfires and things like that, they will be able to have property tax savings. So when they move, like where they relocate at, they will be able to take the state taxes or relief of where they are, not where it was actually affected. So I had to dig a little deeper into that one, because like if you say yes on this, what you're saying is someone may live in California, but say they go to, I don't know, let's go to Phoenix. Phoenix local government will gain the millions of someone who has lived in California for a long time. That's one thing that could happen, but it will limit the taxes on those seniors and those qualified individuals disabled or affected by a disaster. And most important, the one thing I like about it, it takes away that wealthy loophole that wealthy people have, like saying, okay, I do everything in California, but I live in Texas where there are no state taxes. If you say yes. So that's the part that made me start saying, yes, looking pretty good. So if you say no on it, what will really be affected by no is if you are a parent and you want to pass down your property onto your children, then they won't have the increased taxes. So I'm going to vote with that 80-20 rule in my mind. There are some people who have all this nice houses and stuff, houses and land, like the Lord gave houses and land, cattle on 1,000 hills. There are some people who have all that, and they'll be able to pass that on to their generation, and they won't have to have these increased taxes if we say no. That's not the 80% of the majority of the people. I'd rather use my vote to protect the seniors, the qualified people that's disabled, and definitely putting up a stop hole so that the wealthy can stop finding a loophole to save their tax money. Because we already know, and I'll just say it, I mean, we already know how much taxes Donald Trump paid. He found loopholes on loopholes, and I'm in here working, and I'm like, oh Lord, let me claim single zero so I won't be paying the IRS, right? So I am not for supporting that.
Again, we're not in a position. What we're telling everyone is vote intelligently. Read the proposition in detail so that you are aware of what is in the background. And I was talking with someone today earlier, could have been the panel, just saying that these things are written specifically that if you don't just literally go in and dissect them, you will vote the opposite of what your intention was in voting. So you literally have to sit down with a pencil and paper and pull out your dictionary and say, okay, this word means this. Yes. So you understand how to place it in your thought processes when you make your vote. They are written very creatively by very smart individuals, specifically to confuse you. So again, that's why we're talking tonight. We're not trying to persuade you. What we do want you to do, if you have not voted, one, we need you to vote. And number two, when you do vote, we want you to do it because you've made a clear, conscious decision on what that vote is going to be. And then you're willing to stand behind your vote. So very quickly, we're going to speed up a little bit because I want to leave enough room for making sure that we cover Proposition 23. And we're going back to leave enough time for Colette to really drive in 16. And I know we got some good conversation on this one, Crystal. Go ahead.
So, Proposition 20 was just loaded. It had multiple things inside of it. So just when a prop does that right there automatically makes me want to say no. It's like, what does it want to do? Certain thefts related to crimes, certain theft crimes will have increased penalties and longer jail terms. That's the first part of this prop. Then the second prop is pretty vague, and it says it will help release certain inmates early. Well, it just says certain inmates. It doesn't even say what kind of inmates, and I know they say non-violent, but what does nonviolent really mean for me? And I'm just going with my definitions of what I understand. And then the third thing is said, law enforcement will be able to require to collect DNA samples on, all adults convicted even of certain misdemeanors. Currently, right now, the law only requires DNA samples to be collected on anyone who commits a felony, is a registered sex offender, or an arsonist. I feel like Prop 20 is so loaded with so many things that it doesn't feel good to me for what it's doing for the criminal justice system. And one other thing that it did say too, it's going to create 2 new crime charges. one called serial theft, and another one called organized retail theft. All of that is under one prop. I'm like, no, you break it down, come back another year, break it down. This sounds like 5 props to me. You put way too much in this. This is a casserole.
Yeah. Again, for anyone else on the panel, you have any comments before we? Anyone else?
I agree. It's way too much.
Yeah.
That's a
And
heavy
this
one right there.
Yeah, and this is why we're bringing this to the table. What we're saying to everyone, you've got to vote intelligently. And we have lots of family members. We got lots of friends we know that have done some criminal activity that, you know, they're getting their lives back together. But this particular proposition could put people in a lot of disadvantaged positions. And we don't want to be a part of that. So again, make sure that you vote intelligently. And I think our position from the panel might be something like this.
Right. No.
And Kimmy, being an ex-peace officer, I thought for sure you were going to give us some thoughts on that.
Yeah, so that I actually was, and then I realized I was muted. So, but yeah, I agree. When you already have a lot of issues with the criminal justice system to begin with, adding on some additional layers really just feed into some issues. So like Crystal said, it's too many things. If they really wanted to break down into different props, they could have done that and really just dealt with each one of them. But to put so much, one part of the prop could be great and the other two could be bad. And so you just really have to vote no on it because it will affect how the other two play out. So altogether, because it's just too much rolled up, I would say no on this one. They need to rewrite it. If they rewrite it and bring it back properly, I would probably have a different mindset on some things about it.
Great. Okay, great. Let's jump into 21. And I think, Kimmy, that's you.
Okay, so let's see here. Is this 21? 21 is to expand local government's authority to enact rent control and residential property. So actually, I had looked over on 22, but I can go into 21 and talk a little bit about it. If you were to vote yes on 22, the vote would mean that state law would allow cities and counties to apply more kinds of rent control to more properties than under current law. And if you were to vote no on this issue, it means that for this measure, the state law would maintain current limits on the rent control in your laws in your cities and your counties that can apply. So in essence, what we see is issues like in San Francisco, even in Sacramento where I am, but you look at San Francisco where you have a little studio place and the rent is like $4,000. And then in 6 months, it could be $4,200. And by the end of the year, it could almost be $5,000 because there is no limit. There is no limit on rent control. So when the government steps in and your city says, no, there's a limit. I think that is a good thing to have a limit on rent control. You have landlords who can kind of be slum landlords and you have some that are really good. But when a landlord is really effectively managing their property well, they should be able to maintain a good standard of rent and go up with the standards of living. So if your standards of living in your city is, 3% every year, that person is probably most engaged to get a raise at the 3%. They're gonna be able to pay that rent. I could see it moving up in those steps, but to overall cloud the whole industry and say it's a free for all and do it yourself as you see fit doesn't sit well with me.
Right. I must say that I agree, Kimmy. So thank you for your comments on that. Crystal, if you're still at the table, did you have any comments on that one? If not, we're going to move on. Colette or Renisha, you have any thoughts?
I agree with her.
I think that this was the only proposition that I saw that was on there to attack homelessness. We don't have no answers for homelessness, but this is what San Francisco has done, and we know that they have homeless people just like every block, right? As you walk down the pier. So maybe it'll help. So I think I was going to say yes on it. Let's try something. We got to do something.
Yes, I agree.
And there are voter guides that do say yes, on Proposition 21. And so being intelligent about how you're looking at the proposition. So, there's not a unanimous, California in terms of, having rent control because the rent is high, and this is why there is homelessness. And so this one is written in a convoluted way, so really do read through. There are organizations that are promoting yes on Proposition 21.
Okay, great. Thank you for that insight. Again, read the proposition and vote intelligently. And quickly, number 22, and we'll go to 23.
All right, so 22 here. 22, let's see, exempts app-based transportation and delivery companies from providing employee benefits to certain drivers. So what we've been seeing this has been such a big thing. Uber, Lyft, rideshare, they've all been a part of this big lawsuit. And what they're really trying to do, what it means, let me just real quickly, if you vote yes, it means that app-based rideshares and delivery companies could hire their drivers independently. But if you vote no, the app-based rideshare and delivery companies would have to hire drivers as employees if the courts say that the recent state law makes drivers an employee versus independent. So I am really for yes on this. I think that I don't think that the government really should get into the individual companies as far as how they employ people. They want to do it because obviously it's going to bring a tax. It's going to be a revenue.
Right.
So it benefits them, but it doesn't benefit the companies. And I'm okay with that. Somebody came up with an amazing app. I wish I would have, right? So it's okay that a company came up with this and they're making millions and billions of dollars. That's the whole American dream, what we're supposed to be striving to. So to say yes really keeps the money in the pocket of those self-employees. How they deal with their taxes and deal with their resources are on them. And it really lets people be their own independent and have their own schedule for their families and for their needs. So that's my view on it.
Great.
Yeah.
And we find ourselves, yes, no conversation. Yes. From the other two panel, you got any thoughts on it?
No.
Again, there's a lot of conversation. This one is very convoluted because Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash and companies like that are, making a profit right now. And so when we look at who's behind, just look at who's behind the yes or no side. When you're reading through the proposition, there are voter guides out there from a variety of perspectives. And so there are groups that are saying, yes or no. They're saying no as well as yes. And so we just want to look at both sides of it. Some of these are going to be hotly contended. And so that's why it's important to vote.
Yeah. That's, the overall of our conversation tonight was vote. You got to vote. And again, vote intelligently. Go read the detailed background information. You brought up another good point, Colette, is find out who's behind it, who's sponsoring this. And then all the whys will come forward. So you say, oh, okay, they're really going to benefit from this or whatever's happening. You just got to be intelligent about it. And then proposition number 23 is personal and home. And we're going to allow dialogue for a few moments between Ronisha and Kimmy.
All right, so Proposition 23 establishes state requirements for kidney dialysis clinics, requires on-site medical professionals. And so, Ronisha, this would be you and I talking about this, right? And you and I fit so well into the subject because for many people may or may not know, my husband is on dialysis, but you are also a patient of dialysis. So this really does affect you and your level of care. So I will talk about what the yes means and what the no means. And then if you can chime in after that. So the yes vote means dialysis clinics would be required to have a doctor on site during all patient treatment hours. And the no means that dialysis clinic would not be required to have a doctor on site during all patient treatment hours. And so from my point of view, my husband goes into clinic and he goes in and he only sees his doctor once a week. He does home hemodialysis. So it's a little different, but when he does go in, he has to make a scheduled appointment. The doctor is not there. When he needs a prescription, he's got to call the doctor. He can't reach out to him just in clinic. But at the same time, we're not there. So I'm not for sure exactly some of the points. So I'm going to go ahead and let you talk about that. How do you feel about this?
Well, coming from a patient's point of view, I did look at it on the yes point of view. The yes would be an advantage to have a doctor there that can write the prescriptions and what have you. Before you can ever open a clinic, though, they do have a doctor that attends every clinic, but they're not always there. And they can call them as far as prescriptions. These are inside clinics. I can't really speak much for the home side of it. and we have nurses there. There are a lot of safety issues that it came up about this prop. I think it was called Prop 8 last time it came up. But being there, being a patient, the reason why I would say no on it is because it would pull a lot of our doctors that do rounds. You have, if you, depending on who you have, your Sutter, Kaiser, what have you, your doctor do a round once or twice a month. If you need to see them more frequently than that, then you can go in and your medications are delivered to you. Depending on if you have DaVita or Fresenius, all these companies, there's two really large ones that really handle dialysis. And as a patient, my purpose for saying no on it would be that they're kind of misleading by saying they're going to place a doctor there all the time and a nurse there all the time. We have those already in place. Certain things that they're saying they're going to put in place as far as making sure that the services are there and they're provided for us. Things are infectious diseases are based on dialysis are reported, and things like all these things that they're saying that they're going to put in place are already in place at the clinics, honestly.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I don't understand, like Missionary James was saying, it really pays to get deep into the props because they word them a certain way where people get a little confused. It comes across as if we don't see a physician, and we do. We don't see them daily. It's not necessary. The nurses that they put there, some of them are nurse practitioners at most clinics and I've only been to two, but most of them have a nurse practitioner that is there every day or a PA that's there every day at the clinics. So you can see them and they can write prescriptions that are, dialysis patients may need. So go ahead.
So are you saying that you would vote no on 23?
I definitely would vote no, because what happens in my personal experience when I couldn't get dialyzed at a clinic here recently because of COVID, I had a procedure coming up, so they require you to take a test for COVID. Because I had to take a test, they wouldn't dialyze me at my clinic. And it was just a safety precaution. So I had to go to the hospital. I was fine, but now I'm wasting time at the hospital and putting my body at in jeopardy for more. And the amount of patients that would have to go to the hospital for dialysis is ridiculous. Nurses aren't trained to dialyze us. It takes a special training for that at the hospital. So the clinics are necessary, but it's a kind of a teeter-totter if you're not up to code at your clinic. I've been in that situation too. And so I think that's where the yes part of the prop is coming in at, where they're wanting to keep the clinics up to code based on the state code and federal code. And, when they come in, these larger clinics, Sacramento, I'm only speaking for where I've been. Sacramento only have two larger clinics. The rest of them are pretty small. But in 2014, when I went back to the South in Memphis and Alabama, they're completely different. They have strict laws, in order, and it keeps the clinics on point, but they still don't have a doctor that runs that clinic as opposed to DaVita does. You have to have that. Go ahead, Crystal. Look like you want to.
Yeah, I need to chime in on that because you guys know that the thing about it is, if we say yes on it, of course, if you look at it from a clinical perspective, you want a doctor, you want a nurse practitioner, you want them on hand to be able to, if someone's having dialysis, when they're taking off and they're cleaning, because those, they're just cleaning their blood, they're washing it because they can't urinate that off. What happens is their blood pressure drops a lot of times, and they will need other drugs, other medications to keep them going. But DaVita has pretty much cornered this market, right? When you think of dialysis, treatments, clinics, chronic treatments, DaVita is the go-to person here in our area. If we say no, right, it will allow clinics to stay open. They may have one doctor or one practitioner within a geographical area that may oversee these multiple clinics and do rounds. That's kind of what they have going on right now, but it allows larger access to be able to treat more people. And I just have to tell you, in dialysis clinics are a lot of Black and brown faces.
Yes.
That is who are in these areas, and they need to have access. And if they lose their chair, We call it a dialysis chair. If you lose your dialysis chair, there is no guarantee that you're going to get another chair. Now, I would love to say yes and say, put more doctors there, do it and have someone on site, but it would not help the masses. We need to give healthcare to as many people as we can. And y'all know I'm all for technology. That's why they have telehealth. If somebody gets in trouble, call the doctor on the iPad. Put them in the system, put them in the clinic via iPad, and we can treat the patient. So it's kind of like, let's keep these clinics open. We got to say no.
Keep the
And
clinic
I agree with you. That's one of my
No,
main
we're going no.
my main issue regarding that.
And this is the one where we have to make sure that we go back and read in detail what's happening around this, that it's coming to the table again. And we know that the market again has been cornered, but this is one that impacts so many of us. Like you said, I had the opportunity to take someone there and a family member, and I sat there for like 3 hours in total. Oh, my mouth was wide open. I said, there's nobody coming in here but people that look like me. What is happening that this is happening to our community? There is so much around this that needs to be addressed. So thank you, Renisha, for that comment. And we lift you up in prayer that you continue to get the services that you need. And Kimmy, in your particular situation, and your family as well, we need proper care. And Crystal, thank you for that medical background information to move us forward. So what I want to do is I want to jump back to Prop 16. I know we have Prop 24 and 25, but we're going to table those for right now. That was correct, 24 and 25, right?
Yeah, and they're actually really quick. We can actually
go ahead.
So we can just finish them.
Okay.
So 24 amends consumer privacy laws. This is real basic. If you want to keep privacy laws like where they are right now, just standard, you would say no. If you really want to see privacy laws go increase, all of these breaches that have happened, these security incidents with these companies, you want them to be responsible with your data and personal information, you would vote yes on this. This really increases the requirements for them to bring a standard to the privacy law. So I would vote yes on increasing the privacy laws that we are.
That was my vote on that one.
Yeah. And then lastly on Prop 25 is the referendum on law that replaces money with bail systems based on public safety and flight risk. And so this is a real interesting one with being in criminal justice. But if you vote yes, it means that no one would have to pay bail to be released from jail before trial. And if you vote no, this means that some people would continue to pay bail and be released from jail before trial. I'm really big on this. I say yes, there needs to be a system. Their bail is there for a reason. It requires people to get bonds, which requires them to come back to court based off of things that they put up in bond. And I just think not having a monetary attachment to something, people aren't interested if there's no money attached in some cases. So I would vote yes on this one.
Okay. But yes says that no bail would be required.
Okay, so hold on 1 second.
Right.
So
Yeah. This is a good example of how they changed those words, you know, to make it seem like you're supposed to vote yes, but you're supposed to say no, no, no. You're going to pay some money if you want to get out. You do the crime, pay some money.
Pretty much.
Don't have to go and don't collect $200, right?
No, do not do that $200.
No.
I'm not putting my house up for bail. No.
Right.
So we have 15 minutes, and we want to talk about a big one that's really important to all of us of color. And we have some good conversation we want to put around it. So let me read Proposition 16, and then we're going to turn it over to Colette. Number 16 says, allows diversity as a factor in public employment, education, and contracting decisions. Legislative constitutional amendment. Voting yes on Proposition 16 means the state and local entities could consider race, sex, color, and ethnicity and national origin in public education, employment, and contracting to the extent allowed under federal and state law. Voting no means the current ban on this consideration of race, sex, color, ethnicity, and origin in public education, employment, and contracting would remain in effect. Colette, would you please educate us and give us some information?
I will do so. Honored to be here and talk about Proposition 16. And I'll do both sides. When we say lift the affirmative action ban, if you've been in California a while, in 1996, California banned affirmative action. Ward Connerly at the time put forward Proposition 209, and simply speaking, Proposition 16 overturns Proposition 209. A lot of information out there about what it does, and literally it just says that you could now consider race. What it is not, what Proposition 16 is not, is quotas. It is not saying 10% of the population will get this, but it does consider race. Right now, Proposition 16, in terms of education, contracts, employment, we can't consider race as a factor. California is one of 9 states that bans affirmative action, but it is a very diverse state. And so, we've seen the devastations in terms of employment, education, and also, equity. And so really what this does is begins the process of dismantling structural racism and sexism. The no people really are saying that it's working for everyone right now, the way that it is. That is to keep the ban the way that it is. That's what was promised before, that there would be equal opportunity for all under Proposition 209. But we can see across the board devastation. But Proposition 209 is the law of the land right now. And so you can't consider race at all in anything. I think that's a good, 2 minutes wrap up.
So, Dr. Collette, help me out a little bit when we think about going to a higher institution for education today with Prop 209.
Mm-hmm.
My application comes in and it's with the review team. What are they looking at?
They're looking at currently they've kind of put on hold SAT scores because of COVID, and only being able to do it online. But prior to, they consider your SAT scores, and then also your GPA, and then also your letter, your personal statement letter. And so when we consider that, the UC system takes the top 6 to 9% of applicants, if you haven't taken geometry and algebra by the time you are in 7th grade, you really are not going to be qualified for a UC school. You're not going to meet the minimum qualifications. The other thing is that structural racism, the system is kind of structured in a way that now the average GPA to get into UCLA is 4.2. It's beyond an A, And so when we look at that, those are students who took advanced placement, and they've also taken other classes. They've taken maybe dual enrollment or advanced placement in community college. They've had access to, other things that make them a more viable candidate. Race is not considered right now, but we can see across the board that there are less African Americans, less Latinx students who are in the UC system. And I specifically mentioned the UC system, but it's across the board with CSU and community college, even though it's an open access system.
So with the approval of Proposition 16, are you saying now that they can give some weight to people of color?
So what can happen now is that we have particular programs, like for K through 12, we know across the board who is not doing as well. K through 12, community college, CSU, UC, that African American students, Latinx students are not as well. They're not reading at grade level or math levels. And so what we can do with monies now with the pass of Proposition 16 is to target particular populations. Like right now, if a child is having a difficulty in math, we cannot spend direct monies on African American students to do better. We have to open it up for everybody and say everybody has access to these particular programs. However, we know that everybody doesn't have access to those programs. And then really 70% of our faculty in K through 12 and CSU and community college are white Americans. And it really is that those who have access to those employment opportunities, if you look across the board, everybody knows that if an African American male sees a person of color in their K through 12 experience, they're more likely to complete high school and get their high school diploma, much more likely to go on to a community college or to CSU or to a UC school. So it really is that we can target now hiring a diverse population of students, of educators, teachers.
Okay, thanks for that information. Crystal, I know you had some concerns. What are your thoughts?
I do, just a little. So, and Dr. Colette, thank you for having this conversation because I have to tell you, I'm not all pro for the affirmative action. Honestly, and not because I don't think that the system is not broken, because I know that the further you get up in certain areas, you don't even see anybody at the boardroom that looks like you. And in certain areas that is very difficult. But what I don't feel like you go to school, you get your master's degree, you work hard, you push yourself in college, and when you finally get to that place and someone turns around and says, oh, you're here only because of affirmative action. I'm not here because of affirmative action. I'm here because I had a 3.9 or a 4.0 GPA, because I went and did my bachelor's and my master's, and I worked hard and did everything that I needed to do. It wasn't because of the color of my skin. And I don't want someone to say that your hard work was based on a law that was in place because we needed to give Blacks an opportunity. I think we need to look at it a little differently. I don't want to say that it's only because I'm Black while I'm where I am.
And I can see that, because people are concerned about quotas and that people would be given preferential treatment. What it just says is that you can recruit. Like now there are diversity recruitments, but they're open to everyone. Everybody can come in. And so when we talk about being able to target, it is in the science, technology, and the STEM programs in particular, is that we can create a larger pool of people who would then apply for those positions. Right now, in some of the STEM areas, is that we have less people to pull from. So even if one or two are, if we try to say, where will they go? There are certain groups of teachers that there's only a certain few, and like a student of color may never see a faculty member of color and won't have that impact. It's really, what does diversity do for our state? And there's research out there that shows that students who see a diverse population of faculty or teachers, they're much more likely to do better. If you see an African-American man teaching math, how does that speak to you? So I understand, people are concerned about quotas, but we banned affirmative action 24 years ago, and you can look across the board in terms of devastation in our educational system. It has not worked. When Proposition 209 was passed, it promised to diversify our faculty, to diversify our student population. And it said, it was one of those tricky populations, propositions. It said, we're going to have opportunity for all. And that has not been the case. That people with a master's degree in math, I could give you statistics, but I can just safely tell you that 70%, if you go to EdTrust West, there's a report out about K through 12 and devastation across the board. It is one of those propositions you have to read. It got on the ballot late, but it is amending our Constitution, and it's returning to lifting the ban. Like 24 years ago, the ban was placed there that we couldn't use affirmative action. And it's really about data. It's really about saying who's succeeding and who's not, who's getting economic opportunities. If you don't get an education, and I say across the board, if you don't get an education, you are not going to succeed in our society. I mean, there's rare, people who do that. They go in and they're entrepreneurs, but they have something in them that maybe, through K through 12 that they got that said, you can go out and be an entrepreneur that really creates a viable economic opportunity. When we look at contracts, that's really where we're concerned, is that what's the devastation through COVID-19? Who was eligible for PPE? Who got money? Who didn't? And I can tell you, it's not people that look like us. I can see where people are looking at quotas and saying, I don't want to be an affirmative action hire. You're right. The higher up you go in any educational system, K through 12, community college, CSU, UC, This is the first time that the UC president is an African American man. The CSU president is a Latinx man. The community college chancellor is a Latinx man. This is the first time in the history of California that they've risen to the top. But I can tell you, underneath them is 70% of white faculty. And I'm not saying that white faculty can't be equity and inclusion minded, but the equal opportunities aren't there. I know I'm starting to preach, but I wanted to present both sides.
No, you're doing great. One of the things I heard too, and that was then you got people who have parents who are paying for them to get into school, so they're bypassing any set system. And they're automatically going to be successful and get degrees because their parents are paying for it. And then you jump back to the families of color, there's no way they have those types of opportunities available to them. So we have to have something in place that provides at least an opportunity for people of color to get the same, benefits.
And there's an opportunity for European American students to see an African American, to learn cultural values from someone else, cultural perspective, to look at different theories. Most of the theories that people are presented in higher education are from a Eurocentric perspective, and they don't present, if someone sees an African American, they see the possibility. If you look at our national leaders, if you look at our local leaders, who do they represent? And we just need more examples of that and a way to cultivate. And so really Proposition 16 lifts the ban on affirmative action. And when we say what really is affirmative action, it's not quotas. It's creating opportunity for all across the board. Latinx, African American, Asian Pacific Islanders. There's a misnomer that, Proposition 209 helped more Asian Pacific Islanders get into certain schools, but UCs, there's only 9 UCs. There's only 9 of them. And so, if you're trying to get into a UC, I say UC Merced is the way to go because it's not impacted, but, we need more opportunities for all of our students so that, all of our children can dream of being a scientist and being in the classroom, and that people never think of them as an affirmative action hire, that they think of it as we've all had equal opportunity to get there, so that when you see me, I'm not a unicorn. I am someone who you've seen before in an environment. When I tell people that I'm a community college administrator, 1, they don't believe it. And then 2, they ask me where I went to school. Then they ask me where my doctorate is from. And it's an interesting conversation. I don't want that to be for the next 24 years. I don't want that to be our conversation. I want an African-American male. And I keep saying African-American males because it just is devastating what's happened to our African-American males in terms of education.
Great.
I will just say, Dr. Colette, I appreciate the discussion and also the viewpoint that you have given, and it'll give me some thoughts to, really think and consider, definitely taking it from the fact that it's not a quota. I still just don't know yet. I need to really take a moment and step back and look at the proposition, because I'm not sure if this is the proposition is the way to address such a systemic issue that's just bigger, because we want to see in healthcare, people like to see people that look like them take care of them. When I walk into African Americans, I'll just talk to that. There's a mistrust in healthcare. And when I walk in the room, I've had someone come and say, "Oh my God, babe, I'm so glad you're here." An older woman. And I will just sit down and talk to her and be able to connect. So I know that we need multi-generation, multicultural people in the workforce so that we can definitely connect with the community. I just didn't know if this proposition was the one way to handle that, because it sounds like I also don't want someone to turn around and say, "Oh, she's only here because she's Black or because she's a woman." No, I'm here because we worked hard to get here and do it. So I guess that's where, my pause comes in. But I definitely appreciate, you talking about this topic.
So I'm going to invite you to look at who's for the proposition, who has endorsed Proposition 16, and who's against it. Ward Connerly was the author of Proposition 209. He's not an educator. I mean, yes, he served on the UC Regents, but he's not a person who's worked in education for the last, 24 years. He wrote the proposition, kind of was the front person, and then we never heard from him again. Those people who are endorsing the proposition and those people who are against, is to look at that, and I can tell you a few of the people who have endorsed Proposition 16 is Governor Gavin Newsom has endorsed Proposition 16, yeah. Kamala Harris, our Vice President-elect, many of the Nancy Pelosi has, endorsed Proposition 16. So many of our politicians. The author of Proposition 16 is Dr. Shirley Weber, and if you have not, heard of Shirley Weber, an assembly member out of San Diego. She is simply amazing. She's doing a lot to address. She's an educator from UC San Diego, longtime ethnic studies professor. And so she has done a lot to write legislation to right the wrongs that are happening in California. She's someone who really believes, and we need to address structural racism. I agree. It's not everything. I'm not going to say magically if yes on Proposition 16 passes that all of a sudden poof, we're not going to have issues where there are structural racism, but we need our kids to have hope and believe that they can be anything that they want to be. That you're right, we shouldn't have where you walk in and someone thinks you're an affirmative action hire. I want it to be normal that, a child starts kindergarten and then that they would have the opportunity to not go to community college, because that's 70% of our students are, 70% of students in community college are students of color. They go to a community college first and then transfer. And I'm going to tell you how long it takes people to transfer. It's usually 6 to 7 years to transfer to a 4-year institution. And so even getting that master's degree, how long it takes someone, and really that's economic devastation to get to where they are. So when you do see a person of color who's a medical professor, medical doctor, ask them where they went to school. And I can tell you there's a higher percentage that came from an HBCU. They did not go to, there's rare people that went to, UC or CSU, but it's coming from our HBCUs that are developing, STEM graduates and are going on to medical school. And so, we have our work to do. This is not a magic bullet by any means, but 24 years ago, we passed Proposition 209, and we're one of 9 states that has a ban on affirmative action. So when we look at the other 41 states, of what are they doing across the United States, California used to be the leader in education. We are not the leaders in education. And, when we talk about economic recovery, we can really look at that, having fair opportunities to contracts. What's going to happen when the economy turns around is who will have access to those contracts. It needs to be that we look at everybody and say this ban needs to be lifted. It came on the ballot late, and so there's a lot of misnomers out there. But it's important to read who's for it and who's against it. I think that's the important thing.
Right. Dr. Harris, thank you very much for that information. And one thing I kind of want to draw back on, I'm from Chico, California, and I can remember, growing up, and when I got ready to go to school to Chico State, they had the Upward Bound. They had all the affirmative action programs that really helped support African Americans and people of color to go to school. And then now when in Chico, growing up, there were no African Americans attending Chico State University. There was none until the Upward Bound program was put into place. And now that that's all been removed, there are very few African Americans that are attending Chico State now because they're not getting accepted. They're again, they go into the junior colleges, and by the time they go there and stay 4 to 6 years, then they get to Chico State. They're so broke and tired that a lot of them quit, and they go get jobs that stay in the that menial salary range, and they just don't finish school. So that's really sad.
Upward Bound, programs that target first generation college students, TRIO programs, all of those programs are designed for anybody can be a part of those programs. They're not specifically looking at who are the underserved populations. And then we're not recording data as to how many people go through Upward Bound and then go on to college. We're not even looking at what, what would, 67 years, Shantae, yes, it's the truth. And that's on average. So there are people who are taking much longer, and it's usually African-American students who, and Latinx students who are home with children right now, in terms of COVID, people are home with kids. Can you imagine studying? Some of you are experiencing that.
Oh, Lord.
Homeschooling kids and doing all kinds of things. Again, this is not a magic bullet, but it's a start. That we banned affirmative action 24 years ago. And you can look across the board of, how much money African Americans make, women make. So this is addressing, it's not, a fix or a magic bullet. It's addressing systemic racism and sexism. And so I just encourage you to really read the ballot information. The what's in voter registration is confusing. I'm not going to, I was told it's confusing. When you read it, it's confusing. And so you just have to read it and digest. But I also, again, encourage you to read who's for and who's against.
Great. Thank you very much. So that's it for the King's Table tonight. We've had an amazing platform tonight. And what we really want to remind you of is that we have an obligation and a responsibility to vote. And just like Esther had to make a decision, I am going to stand up for my people, even if it's a risk, if it costs my life, I have to stand up. So that's what we're saying to each and every one of you that are watching tonight. Share this with someone else and, talk to them about it and say, hey, are you voting? It's not my responsibility to ask you what you're voting for, but it is my responsibility to say, hey, let's go to the polls together. Let's walk hand in hand. Let's make sure that we get to the polls, that we get them in the proper ballot boxes. Find your location where you can vote. And for your personal conviction, there is someone just sent a site in. Thank you, Bonnie Daniels, for this information. And we want to share it with you. If you want to make an informational resource for California Council of Churches Impact, you can go to church, 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 impact, IMPACT.org. And apparently there's some really good information there that will just give you some more detailed information regarding your personal conviction. So tonight, from the King's Table, all the panels coming back to the platform, I want to thank each and every one of you for joining me tonight and sharing your own personal thoughts and ideas around this voting time of the year. But I think it's really important right now. I just really want to close in a moment of prayer that we can pray for God's people and people in general, no matter what you believe, no matter what your personal convictions are. This is a time that we all must take a inside look and say, I'm going to vote. I'm going to vote my conviction, and I'm willing to stand by that vote. Whatever it is, I'm going to live with it. Until the next time, I'm going to live with my decision that I make. So just join me in a word of prayer. God, we thank you for this night. We thank you for this platform at the King's Table to come and share and bring information to people, to just call them to a time of action. They need to vote. They need to vote intelligently. They need to read the information, and then, Lord, the conviction of their hearts. We just pray that people would make those decisions and be willing to stand by it. So God, we thank you tonight for this opportunity. We pray for everyone all across the world, for our president, our governors, our senators, our legislators, and we pray for each man, woman, boy, and girl that they would be responsible citizens. We thank you for this opportunity. Amen. Thank you, Dr. Gillette. Thank you, Ronisha Hall, for sharing your own personal convictions and what you're voting. And to Kimmy and Crystal tonight at the King's Table. We've been talking about this last quarter. We were going to talk tonight about it's the fourth quarter. Your football games are on right now. You know, a game is won or lost in the fourth quarter. The game is not won in the first quarter. We were going to talk about that tonight, but I promise you on next Monday night, we are going to finish up the King's Table talking about it's the fourth quarter. I want to know how you plan on finishing. Do you plan on finishing well, or do you plan on buckling under everything that's going on? Tired, defeated, disgusted, broke, mad, sick of it all? Or are you going to rise to the occasion like Esther did? And she said, you know what? I'm going to the king and I'm going to present myself. And whether I die, I die. If I live, I live. But you know what? We got to finish strong. We can't quit now. So please join us next Monday night. Share it, call a friend, tell somebody. We're all coming to the table because we're going to talk about how to finish strong. God bless you, and thank you for joining us at the King's Table. Have an amazing night on purpose.